Chapter 1. I am surprised to see a boyette of your caliber so far from the capital, the viceroy said, motioning her to sit as he too sat behind a desk the cost of which the boyette knew could feed her family for a generation. The boyette folded her thin 7-foot-tall frame gracefully into the directed chair. Yes, we do not travel easily, she nodded. In truth, sir, this is my first time out into the provinces. I must presume your visit is motivated by something quite important, though what a boyette of a calming house would have to do with me I cannot imagine. This can't have something to do with my application. No, sir, not directly. The viceroy smiled. He had submitted his application to the calming house years ago, knowing his status would never win himself a female, but nevertheless expected by the royals to go through the motions of asking. I understand the calming house outside the capital is to be closed soon. The last one to go, he said. That is correct, sir. All of the remaining females have been allocated. There are no more, except for one. One? The reason I am here, sir, there is one female who has not been allocated, not properly. May I elucidate? Yes. She is to be sent to a bordello, the one near here in Barrow City, a few streets from the palace. A female? To a bordello? What in blazes for? No bordello could afford a female. This female was not calmed, sir. She has lived at the calming house for almost a year, and she was never calmed. May I speak freely? I must criticize the Duke, and I ask your pardon and permission. You have it. When females are captured in the hinterlands and brought to the calming house, various methods are applied, of course. These methods are fashioned to the girl, what works best. The most common is to simply accentuate how improved her life will be, how bounteous and comfortable it will be with her new owner if she submits. For other females, more is needed. Coercion, sir. Some females can be very non-compliant in the beginning. I've heard rumors. But the calming house is well practiced. The females are trained. Some say broken. Yes, I do not like to see that, sir. I am a boyette. I look after their welfare. My only goal is to see them well cared for, and to learn what they need to know to please their new owner. I have always worked hard to make this transition for the females as easy as possible. There have been some difficulties, surely, but never a failure, until this female. What are you talking about? This female did not break. She was never calmed. Her name is Volina, though I suspect that is false. I am thoroughly confused, boyette. I think you'd better start at the beginning. Thank you, sir. Volina was captured in a small southern province in the forest of N, one of the last females ever found. She was brought to the calming house and training was begun, and failed in every way. Training was then intensified. You mean she was tortured? Yes, sir. It is hard to believe anyone, let alone a female, could withstand a disciplinarian's torture at a calming house. Dukes are not known for their tolerance. Volina withstood torture because she is not afraid of death. There was nothing we could do to her, nothing the disciplinarian could do to break her, not if she preferred death to submission. And what does this have to do with me? I watched, sir, and I think I found her weakness. Oh, she tried to hide it, but I saw. And what is that? Kindness, sir. She has a difficult time making herself not respond to it, an inherent trait, I think. True hatred seems to be quite foreign to her. So she has to work hard, very hard, to keep her hatred of the Vezirine and boyette up. when faced with even the smallest of kindnesses from either. That is the key with her, but naturally I had no say in this. She was treated as the Duke thought appropriate. And the Duke failed? Yes. So now the calming house is to be closed. Volina has no place to go. The Duke will not sell her to a royal dwelling. She would be an embarrassment and black mark against him. He would live in constant dread of retribution when she displeased her owner. The Duke would never risk the wrath of a royal, not even for the cost of a female. So where is Volina to go? To a bordello, Jozef answered, standing and pacing. It was incredible. A female had defeated the Duke of a calming house and its torturer. She must be extraordinary. And she was to be sold to a bordello? No matter how extraordinary she was, she wouldn't last long there. They would tear her flesh from her. He'd heard that the torturers of the calming houses left the females physically unspoilt. That would not be so at a bordello. And what, Boyette, do you wish me to do about this? I would like you to buy her, sir, for your dwelling. But you said she is not calmed. No, sir, she is not. She would not obey you. She would not come to your bed voluntarily. She would do nothing but defy you, hate you. The most egregious of transgressions may have to be ignored at first. But I believe, sir, if you bestow only kindness, it might work. There is no guarantee. But again, if I may speak plainly, in spite of your eminent wealth as vicereine of the largest and richest of the provinces, you are not royal. So your name would never have been reached on the list of Vezarine men wanting females. Never. But this female, I think the Duke might be willing to sell her to you because you aren't royal. It is doubtful you could do anything to him if you are unhappy with her, and he will want the money, sir, if you offer enough. And he knows if he sells her to a vicereine, he might also be able to sell you her wardrobe, whereas he has no chance of that if he sells her to a bordello. As you say, I am wealthy, so he would charge me a fortune for her. A female who would hate and resist me? Not bear me children? Not willingly, at least. This does not seem something I should perhaps become involved in, Boyette. The Boyette stood complacently. I understand, sir. I am sorry to have prevailed upon you and will importune you no further. Why do you think it could be done? If no one at the calming house tamed her, why do you think I could? I think it would be a possibility, if you had the proper help. A Boyette? Yes. Is there one who could do this? There was a Boyette at the calming house. In fact, it was she who trained me. Amongst my kind, she is held in great approbation. She's retired? The Boyette wilted. No, sir. She was arrested. Why? It happened the week before Volina arrived at the calming house. This Boyette complained to the Duke about what she felt was a fondling of one of the about-to-depart feminas. A fondling by whom? The disciplinarian employed at the house, sir. Vicereine Jozef sucked in his breath. A Boyette made criticism of a disciplinarian? That was improvident of her. Yes, sir. The disciplinarian filed a charge of complaint against her, and she was, of course, convicted. But she fled near here, sir, to Barrow City. Why here? Your courts, sir. I know you ostensibly have no say in what goes on in the city outside of your province, but Barrow City's courts are reputed to have some fairness for Boyettes, and that is your doing. I knew your birthing Boyette before she died. I know how you paid her a generous pension even before you became vicereine. How you even offered her shelter in your dwelling when she fell ill. You are known to be one of the few Vezarine who makes himself accessible to us. So perhaps you and this dismissed boyette I speak of could benefit each other. She could help you with Volina, and you could help her with her appeal to the court.
Her appeal will find no relief here, not if the complaint was filed against her by a disciplinarian. All she will get is some delay. The court is slow, especially in summer. Does this boyette work now? At one of the royal dwellings in the city? With a female?
No, sir. She finds work where she can, in the fields mostly, as I will do now that the house is closing. There is little available for boyettes of our years, she said in poignant dignity. But this boyette's skills, sir, if there is a way with Volina, she would find it. And I know how much the bordello is offering for Volina, so if you were to exceed that amount...
A duke would be sorely tempted. Beset with vague misgivings, Jozef began pacing before his large window looking out at his vast lawn. It was inconceivable. Him having a female. Oh, how the royals with no females would burn. But she would be untrustworthy and such an expense. He'd have to provide a boyette for her, and all the clothes, the jewels, the security tether. But a female. The stories he had heard from the royals, if they were even partially true, unimaginable for him to actually touch the softness of a female, smell her scent. He felt himself stir. And he would go through life not alone. The continent of his people, the Vezarine, had few females. Not anymore. Not since their Collegium of Exploration, Discovery, and Invention had discovered a special place. A place with an azoic rock buried deep underground. The Collegium had found it, and the Vezarine mined it for its incredible energy when burned. And unseen, the airborne dust of the burned rock had spread throughout the continent, and slowly Vezarine men had lost their ability to father daughters, at least in the cities and adjacent provinces. Far out in the forests and mountains, females had still been born, but even that had finally stopped. As the Vezarine had made no connection between the fuel rocks and loss of female births, in desperation they had launched ships to cross the oceans in search of females. But just as throughout Vezarine history, none had ever returned. How old is this female?
Sir, you must understand that Volina feels quite comfortable lying to any Vezarine, or boyette for that matter, so we don't know her true age. I am guessing 18. I know that you are 12 years older, but that is not uncommon for a female dwelling. Many of the royals who obtained females were far older than that, and many of the females far younger. And I will tell you something else if I may. Volina is the most beautiful female I have ever seen, sir, unequaled. She has almost fairy beauty. I have seen none such like at the Calming House. You would be the envy of all.
Until she slit my throat.
In my judgment, she would never do that. Oh, not for you, but because of herself. She is religious, a strange one I do not know of. The other females would not talk of it, always professing ignorance. But I saw the way they treated her. Volina is special. There were many times when Volina could have killed, but she did not. I asked her why not, why she had not tried to kill a torturer who had well nigh killed her, and she said that no Vezarine man would ever steal her soul. That is how she views murder. No, death would not be what you would have to fear from her. Jozef's mind floated over the females he had seen. The royals who had females flaunted them, and he'd always just had to watch. A female would sashay down a street in the city, stroll into a shop, and the men would stop, virtually hold their breath, all wanting her,
himself included. Just to touch, to hold. But they did not. Pesterment of effemina was a criminal offense in the Vezarine world. True, being rich, Jozef had been able to speak to the royals' females on rare occasions, their voices so different, so soothing, melodious. But that he might be able to in fact have one? And children! He could have children! Jozef was nearing the age of mandatory cloning, something he was not looking forward to. He glanced at the boyette, again feeling guilt for the treatment of her kind from his. They who had saved his race kept them from shriveling to extinction, and were paid so callously in return. The boyette were a gentle humanoid species, but incapable of the cruelties of men. They were bigger, stronger, but they could not fight back, not in any kind of unified way at least, and so they were subjugated. In servile limitation, they worked for the Vezarine, maintained the roads, picked up the trash, lived subsistence lives, mostly in ghettos near cities. But their kindness and their physical strength had proved advantageous in the taming of the last of the females found on the continent, and the method of the boyette's own reproduction had been utter salvation for the Vezarine. All boyettes were female, all had eggs, and when one boyette implanted her egg into another, the two eggs together created a new boyette. But the Vezarine had discovered something else that could be done with the boyette's reproductive system. Place a man's blood to that egg, and the egg would still reproduce, but, missing half the genetic material it needed to create a new boyette, it instead took all of the genetic material it needed from the man's blood. And the boyette would give birth to the man's clone. Being unnatural, it was an iffy procedure that only worked one time in 10, and not with all boyettes, but it had kept the population of men, though greatly reduced, from quick eradication. Instead, the Vezarine were simply being whittled away, generation to generation, as the boyettes were grudgingly given what was for them their major source of income. Being a clone or a naturally conceived child should have been treated the same amongst the Vezarine people, but it wasn't. Jozef was a clone from a long line of clones, but the royals were real children. Having a child, a royal, was not something Jozef had ever even fantasized attaining. But with his own female, it was a prospect. He let his mind roam, exploring the possibilities. My sons would be royals. True, almost certainly there would be no females for them, but still, as royals, they would rule. And there was so much on the continent that needed changing that he, as a clone, was shut out of. Clones could work, amass fortunes, control commerce, but to them the world of politics was impenetrable. But he would have a female. So would that change? Decades previously there had been some clones, viceroys like him, who had used their wealth to acquire females, and with the birth of their sons had been empowered into the body politic of sorts. But in recent memory, no viceroy he had ever known had received a female. But oh, if he got one, joined the ruling class, so much he would do. First, protect the boyettes. In his province he was able to do that somewhat, but outside of his province, boyettes were terribly mistreated. And so much else, especially the discovery, at last, of what lay across the ocean. He would turn the entire continent to the solution of that riddle, if he could get himself into a ruling position. And he would solve the problem, the loss of female births. Not like the Vezarine's leader, the Grand Prince, who had been promising results for years with nothing to show for it. But all of that first required that he have real children, royals, But with a female who was not tamed? Still, if the boyette was right, if she could be tamed, brought to his will, I could change everything. And what would this female think about coming here, boyette? Sir, you know that is irrelevant. Jozef paused, calculating how to come to terms with it all. His life had become so melancholy since he'd had to give up his dreams and become vicereine of Barrow Province. A female in his dwelling would more than remedy that. He permitted himself a bit of raw, hopeful lust. His lips quirked up slightly, and he nodded. I shall travel to the capital, boyette, to the comming house. I shall speak with the Duke. If I am able to arrange the purchase of this female, Volina, I will do so. Have you spoken of this to any other? No, vicereine. Taming Volina shall take much forbearance. You are well known amongst my people, your broad-mindedness, your charity, your justice. I deem all those traits imperative with Volina, and I have heard of no other man, clone or royal, who is said to possess them as you. I think you are Volina's only chance. I shall pay you a finder's fee for bringing this to me. How much time do I have? The house closes in a month. I shall go now. Do you need transportation back? You may accompany me. That would not be wise, vicereine. You should not be seen with me. Tongues would wag, questions raised. Then I shall give you sufficient funds to ensure your return trip is comfortable. Now, how much did that Duke agree to sell this female to the bordello for? Yuri sat on the beach, feeling the heat saturating up into her from the sand. She wanted to walk to the water, dip her body in to refresh, but knew it would do no good. The water would be warm, hot even. She gazed down to the end of the beach and saw that the wall of flames was getting closer. She did not know how much longer she could last. What little was left of her strength was ebbing away. Why hadn't death claimed her yet? Surely it had been days. Ah, this torturer was a clever one. He knew how to keep her alive. A flash, a fissure, and she saw it, but thankfully did not feel it. Yet. She was still in the cellar, trussed up, hanging upside down over the coals. Yuri didn't see the torturer in the semi-darkness, but assumed he was nearby. Frantically, she redoubled her concentration and sealed the fissure shut. But that it had happened at all signaled she was getting to the end of her capability. Eventually, the hellish flames would get to her, and she would burn. The excruciating pain would... What? Would she yield? Oh, Lyatheka, let me die before the flames reach me. Yuri wondered if she should have constructed her diversionary image to have been that of a cool green forest, home. But that would have taken so much more effort, and the flames would have closed in on her by now. No, the hot beach had been the best choice. Maybe. She could keep the coals, the pain, the torturer, shut out for the longest period of time this way. And, if she was lucky, her physical body would die before her mind lost the capacity to create her meager beach world. And that would be that. Death, failure, but it would be with honor. The flame suddenly flickered, then receded. What was this? Should she look? That would be so risky. She might open herself up to an avalanche of pain, so much she could not get back into her hallucination properly. But the flames were still receding. He was taking her down. That had to be it. The torturer had taken her off the coals. She'd roasted enough. She'd won. And then she heard something slosh, and it started to snow. The shock caused her to lose her concentration so completely that her eyes fluttered open. "You stupid fool!" she heard bleated. She recognized the bellicose voice. Who? The Duke, that was it. Bungler!
I thought
that you could do it. You wanted that success. After all this time. Confound and curse you, disciplinarian. You've damn well nearly killed her.
How long has she been suspended? An unfamiliar voice asked in brittle disdain. Though Yuri didn't know it, it was Jozef, livid at the grisly scene he'd arrived to, knowing it would haunt him for a long time as he tried, and failed, not to cough in the sickly, stinking air. 3 days, the torturer fessed up reluctantly. But I saw to it she got hydrated.
Look at her skin! I assure you, sir, her skin is normally of the most milky white, a treasure, silken and—
It is none of those things now, so save your boasts. Jozef sniffed brusquely, a notice of proviso that her price just went way down.
The cooling bath will restore her, sir. Ah, for you to see her as she truly looks, not marred by all this blistering redness and soot.
The Duke shot Jozef a vacuous smile and the torturer a censorious glare. That was it, Yuri realized groggily as she groped mentally for true awareness. She was bobbing in a bathtub filled with ice. Her eyes were nearly swollen shut, but she could peep out of one and saw a glimpse of the darkly battered face of her torturer. But then she saw fairly clearly, or much clearer than she'd seen anything else, a man she did not recollect. He was standing above her and looking down with an oddly pinched expression on his face. Pained, until he discerned she was actually seeing him, and shudders came down. He looked generally coarsened, though not by evil or drink, but maybe from hard work. Weathered. He was tall and lordly in his distinctive burgundy cloak, but then all of the Vezarine men who came to the house tried to look that way. He, however, had achieved it, and with an ambiance of iron-willed self-assurance to boot. His shoulders were broad, his hair brown or black, she couldn't tell which in the cellar light. He's from the bordello, Yuri thought, wishing she had died over the coals. If she could take no more, she would have to do it herself. I hope you pay a treasure for me, you handsome, detestable slime, and receive nothing but a withered, moldy corpse for your purse. But then her poor frazzled mind remembered she was supposed to go to the bordello. Yuri's torturer also assumed Jozef was from the bordello, though he didn't look, dress, or act the way bordello owners did, people the torturer was well acquainted with. And something about the man was vaguely familiar, too. The torturer turned his attention away, back to the girl, his teeth grinding. This girl was his only failure, a blemish on his record. How much would this dratted, pint-sized flea cost his reputation? The comming houses that hired him were gone now, but the bordello owners would still find his services indispensable. But after this fiasco, being defeated by a female? He was a first-rank disciplinarian, but now he would be the subject of titillation throughout every city on the continent. Oh, how he itched to have more time with her. Ah, well, things will be different soon. Maybe he would look her up, finish what he'd started.
I am sure, sir, that we can come to an accommodation,
the Duke said, all obliging courtesy.
What a stroke of luck this was!
The comming-house Duke had resigned himself to the financial loss of selling Velina to a bordello. But now the richest vicereine of the provinces had shown up and wanted her. It had never occurred to the Duke to offer the girl to a vicereine, but then this vicereine obviously had no knowledge of what Velina was like, the outlook of ever taming her. But so what? By the time Vicereine Jozef figured that out, the Duke would have his money, and what could the Vicereine do then? Ha! As long as the Duke stayed out of the Vicereine's province, nothing. I want the disciplinarian removed from here, Jozef barked, his tone impassioned. Only her boyette attends her until she is ready to travel, assuming we concur on the price."
"Without fail, sir, but that is expensive, and
"I will pay for her boyette while she remains in your house, but I shall provide her boyette at my dwelling myself."
The Duke cocked an eyebrow at that, but recovered quickly.
"She will need appropriate wardrobe. I have the best. I will attend to that also. You need not trouble yourself."
Bedamn botheration!
The Viceroy was leaving him with no way to pad the sales price. "Very good, sir. If you will come with me to my office, I am sure we can finalize matters." "No, I meant what I said. The disciplinarian is unwelcome. Gone. Now." "But I must tend to her condition, sir." The disciplinarian quibbled, never one to know when to retire prudently. "I'm well knowledgeable on the restoration of a subject after discipline." Denying him the importance he seemed to crave, Jozef ignored him and addressed the Duke. "Are there any boyettes left in the house?"
"Yes, but not—"
"Summon one, and remove him."
Jozef bore closer to Yuri and knelt down beside the metal tub she was resting motionless in. She tried to open her eye further, but it would not cooperate.
"Volina,"
he said, his voice strangely low and hoarse, but still trying almost to croon.
"I must tend you. I am experienced at healing the burns of flesh. I will try to be as gentle as I can, but there is no doubt I will cause you pain."
Her breaths were shallow, and her attempt to speak caused her mouth only to loll open. She whimpered, wrenching Jozef's heart. Clearly, she could see that the Duke had taken the disciplinarian by the arm and was leading him away in a militant gait, out through the doorway. The handsome man in the burgundy cloak took that cloak off and spread it on a table. He then dipped both his arms down into the water underneath her and slowly began to lift her up from the water, laying her on the cloak. And then he tore apart the thin sackcloth jumper tied to her, the one the boyette always forced upon her before delivering her to the disciplinarian. The man gazed at her nakedness with wide eyes, taken aback as he tried to stifle a smile. She knew he had probably never seen a naked woman before. He trickled water onto her parched lips, breathing "Volina" solemnly into her ear and holding her, his timbre not of avarice, but more like a prayer of bittersweet concern.
"I will take care of you. No disciplinarian offal shall ever again be put upon you. In this you have my pledge. So wherever you are, come back. Don't go."
His voice was strangely thick as he caressed her ravished flesh with a palliative cream, and though it was incredibly painful and she flinched, she was soothed by it. She managed to stare up at him. He had liquid moonstone blue eyes and an apologetic sadness about him. Leaning down, he took her hand in his and imperceptibly kissed her forehead. He made her wish she could kill. She would kill him, he was so close. He was Vezarine. She would kill him and every other Vezarine man too. Then maybe the boyettes. Well, no, not the boyettes. They suffered at the hands of men too, but definitely the Vezarine. Unfortunately, Liathika had been clear. "The only life you may take is your own, child." To murder another would be to become like them, Liathika had chastened her. And that she must never do. Yuri heard the soft voice of one of the house boyettes. "May I take her, sir?" the voice said.
"Do you know how to deal with injury like this, boyette?"
"Cool her. Make sure her temperature does not soar. Keep careful watch for infection."
"What about pain?"
"I know the salutary dosages for relief, sir. I have tended Volina many times."
"Very well. I must meet with your Duke. If accommodation is reached, I want her delivered to me as soon as she is ready to travel."
The boyette nodded sadly, and Jozef knew she also assumed he was the bordello owner come to survey his intended purchase. He took one last look at Yuri, searching for the beauty, but could see only the travesty, the grotesque outrage, the desecration of the girl's selfhood the disciplinarian had wrought. Jozef had forbidden both bordellos and discipline within his own province, but both nevertheless flourished elsewhere. And in truth he, in lecherous relish, had visited those bordellos more than once in his youth. That is, until he'd seen the beastly way owners turned young males into desirable fimes, and had been so sickened. "Well, not my Volina. She'll never step foot in such premises." Jozef had left the cellar knowing that mental "my" was going to cost him mightily. He sighed. Yuri watched him go, wondering what it would feel like to plunge a knife into his heart. But she also couldn't deny her relief at still being alive, and knew she had him to thank for it. Yuri peered out of the carriage window at the avenue of stately willows as the horses finally stopped. Before her was a huge stone mansion, like the ones she'd seen drawings of in Lyotheka's books. And standing in the courtyard in front of that mansion, in a line up to the entranceway, were at least 10 men, all staring avidly at the carriage, trying, she knew, to get a glimpse of her. Probably drooling. The entire journey had been like that, untidy knots of gawkers straining to see into the carriage as she passed, even in the storm. "We are here," the houseboyette said in palpable relief. "Your new home, Volina." Yuri ignored the boyette, which she always tried to do when possible. She swallowed uncomfortably under the tether around her neck that had been worked to look like gemstones, not a chafing collar whose magnetism would strangle her if she strayed too far from its base stone. "You will get used to it in time, Volina," the boyette said sympathetically. Yuri had to squelch a profanity to this, the oft-repeated standard boyette advice to a female. A man dressed in an elaborately tailored crimson-red suit approached the carriage and opened the door. "Welcome to the dwelling of Jozef, vicereine of the province Barrow, Femin Volina. You are most welcome here," he regaled her loftily. "I am Comus, dwelling master." All eyes riveted on her as he gave her a reverential but twitchy bow, waiting for her to disembark. And then his eyes flared in shock as the boyette unlocked Yuri's ankles that had been cuffed together, then her wrists that had been cuffed behind her back, the only way the boyette had been able to save the dress she'd foisted on Yuri from annihilation. Yuri's refusal to dress as a femina, an owned woman, was legendary at the Calming House. From the rustle of astonishment from the men before her, it was clear that none had envisioned her arrival as involuntary. She hesitated, but then, seeing no benefit to staying in the carriage with the boyette, stepped out, stretching her still aching body. She looked behind at the sky. The carriage had finally outrun the turbulence of the hammering rainstorm that had chased and pummeled them, left the deluge far behind that now appeared only as a malefic line of purple-black clouds threading the horizon. Between that and them, all there was windswept emptiness and the fading light of a weak afternoon sun. A gust of wind billowed, and Yuri turned her attention to the men before her. The men were in a line, all straining to look more closely at her, to gawk. She was about to tear the over-ornamented dress from her body, really give 'em something to look at, when a hand clamped firmly around her arm in warning. The boyette. "I am tasked with delivering the femina to Vicereine Jozef," the boyette said to Comus with a note of apology. "No other." "He is not here, sister," a voice said from the entranceway. "Another boyette. He left permission for you to leave the Femina with me and to give you this in the event he was amiss." The boyette from the mansion walked forward, noticing the boyette's firm grip on Valina's arm, and handed her the purse. Yuri stared at this new one. She was like all boyettes, yet variant somehow. She was at least 1.5 feet taller than Yuri, and very slim, wiry. Yuri knew that meant nothing. Thick muscle packed solidly upon minimal skeletons gave boyettes the strength of horses and the agility of forest leopards. But Yuri saw that this boyette was bald. Her skin lacked the violet hue of a younger boyette. It was the mauve shade of an older, not far from the faded color of Lyatheka's pewter cups that Yuri had been so fond of. The boyette was dressed like all boyettes dressed around their Femina charges, in a long white sheath slit up both sides with matching trousers underneath. So this, Yuri brooded, was to be her new boyette, an old one. She would have to think on that, whether it was beneficial to her or to her detriment. "That is much appreciated, sister," the obviously about to leave boyette said to the obviously about to take over one. "I shall be on away now, if it pleases you. Your task is near complete." The boyette nodded and withdrew the base tetherstone and keys from her pocket, handing them to the other, who stowed them in hers. "May your life be happy and blessed, Femin Volina," the boyette said politely to Yuri, the correct parting address to which everyone waited for Yuri to respond in kind. Her silence hovered in the air like poison until the boyette gave up, turned, and re-entered the carriage, the driver flicking his whip, making the horses clatter away down the flagstone drive toward the distant pillared gates. "If you will come this way, Femin Volina," the dwelling master said unctuously, "everything has been prepared for you." The wind freshened, and an unknown floral perfume floated to Yuri on the breeze. Yuri knew it would do her no good, not accomplish anything, but her soul needed to do it. No, she would not walk voluntarily into the dwelling intent on enslaving her, even though it was unmistakably beautiful. The dwelling towered. It was at least 3 floors high, made of an olive-colored mountain stone Yuri recounted from childhood. At its front was a large half-circle portico, made of slabs of impressed stone with a sculpted balcony above, supported by white marble columns striated in gold. But to Yuri, it was not the columns that gave the dwelling its magisterial splendor, but the ivy that abounded it, teeming with both yellow and pink blossoms, the source of the sweet fragrance that was enveloping her with such an inviting vapor. Yuri had always assumed she knew every plant that existed, but she had never before seen such a growing. The ivy's upward sweeping embrace of the stonework in a living green interlace suggested to her the solace of her lost forest home. "Illusion," she recited at herself viciously. To the gasps of the men, Yuri's new boyette suddenly scooped her up, slung her over her shoulder, and carried her past the astonished line of servants into the behemoth manor. With careful patience, the boyette placed Yuri down inside the entranceway, not appearing at all angry, an emotion rarely displayed by a boyette, but with a sad understanding and pity in her round, overlarge eyes that Yuri despised. Yuri glanced at the open doors behind her. They were bordered with iron, and for a fleeting second, before she caught herself, her nose wrinkled. The tether collar she'd had forced around her neck was bad enough, but at least it was wrapped in a pliant white leather. She scanned the grandiose entrance hall, but saw no more of the hated metal. Instead, the floor underfoot was an exuberant marquetry of diverse shades of woods set in a starburst pattern from its center. On the walls were lush paintings, mostly nature tableaux set in etched gilt frames. A hillside of maple trees painted in fall colors of yellow, orange, and red. A green and brown copse of beech trees shadowing a deer and fawn. A roiling, boundless seascape of grays, teals, and blues. Yuri had never seen real paintings before, and for a moment she was entranced by them until her attention was captured by what hung high above her, something she was sure she knew the name of but could not remember. She was positive the decorative fixture was meant for lighting. It was made of hundreds of pocket-sized pieces of glass cut like teardrops, suspended and shimmering above her like a waterfall of magnificence. Yuri knew the boyette would know the word for the amazing creation and wanted to ask her, but didn't. It was unnecessary, though, as the boyette, already so attuned to her new femina even at this, their first meeting, had followed her gaze. A resplendent chandelier, the boyette fed her the word diplomatically. When its candles are lit, it makes the etching sparkle. Yuri knew the boyette had deliberately directed her attention across the room to a gargantuan fireplace carved from mica-flecked granite that had a large, tarnished, rectangular bronze plate hanging above it that looked like it had been forged in antiquity. Welded and etched intricately upon it in primitive simplicity was a design that made Yuri's mouth drop open in astonishment. The branch of a weeping snow fountain tree and a hummingbird. Was the thing an omen? The boyette took hold of her resolutely. "Allow me to assist you up to your room," she said in obvious order, propelling Yuri to a massive staircase, each step a differently colored feldspar in various montages. Tentatively, Yuri stroked the welcoming smoothness of the banister. It was a polished, burleywood-colored soapstone. Yuri had never before felt such an intriguing, velvety hardness. She looked back. The dwelling master was smiling in encouragement behind her, anxious to illustrate his refined manners as the other servants angled outside for a better view in. Yuri knew how much her residence in the dwelling increased their bragging status and quickened her pace away from them up the staircase. The boyette let go of her. At the top of the stairs, Yuri was on the verge of faltering, and as she caught her breath, the boyette again took hold of her, but not in direction, more in support. Ah, boyette thought, my defiant femina is nary as strong as she would have me believe. That cold-gutted torturer, a jinx of maggots upon him, has left his mark, even if unseen. But I shall erase it. Jozef had secretly hired the boyette 2 weeks earlier, entrusting her with the Calming House's full file on Volina. Just as her predecessor was, Boyette was sure the girl had not given her captors her true name. And Boyette had read and reread every word of it. The file said that Vezarine hunters had known of the female's presence in the forest of N for years, hunted her interminably, but always she'd escaped them. Somehow, with few if anyone to aid her, she'd stayed alive, well, and out of the capture trap set for her. But then she had been caught. Boyette dearly wanted to know how, but those pages in the file were conspicuously missing. Volina had been brought to the Calming House, and the war between her and the Duke and his torturers had begun. It was horrifying and unimaginable what Volina had withstood. Boyette had cared for many females at the house before her dismissal, but no rebellion and its resultant punishment she'd ever seen had come even close to Volina's. That Volina was still alive was a miracle, but Boyette's keen eye could see the fatigue in the girl's bearing, the effort she had to put into her studied impudence. This female needed rest. She needed a tranquil life in a place where she would not be constantly expecting attack. Would the vicereine realize this? Accept it if she told him? Or would he demand Boyette bring Volina to his bedchamber forthwith? All would be surely lost if he did. But Viceroy Joseph was unlike most of the Vezarine men Boyette knew. Perhaps she could indeed convince him to handle Volina with great care and even greater latitude. Let her find her own way to him in her own time. Yuri tottered a step, tried to mask it. The Viceroy knows your journey will have tired you, Femin Volina. He requests that you rest yourself. Here. Boyette opened the door to the immense bedroom, her own room much smaller, but attached. She had spent only the previous night there and didn't know when she would use it again. For the time being, she would sleep on a floor mat near Volina's bed. Yuri walked into the room and was near boggled. The room was the epitome of voluptuous indulgence, richly furnished in teakwood furniture with walls covered in fine white silk. Cadmium green dimity curtains outlined windows that were actually doors leading to a balcony outside. A mirrored dressing table took up near about an entire wall. The room's sole bed was mammoth compared to Yuri's small wooden cot at the calming house, and stacked with layer upon layer of quilts and pillows, the bed topped above with its own roof, draped in ribbons and lace. Yuri longed to collapse upon the bed and sleep, perhaps dream herself flitting amongst the water birds from home as she gathered lake bulrushes for Lyatheka's eternal basket weaving. Oh, Lyatheka, do you miss me? Do you wonder where I am? Do you think I've betrayed everything you taught me? Everything I'm meant to do here? Chapter 2. Jozef hesitated outside the door, furious the storm had prevented him from being able to make it back in time for Volina's arrival. But he was the Viceroy of Barrow Province. Emergencies were emergencies, even when they were not. Yet despite riding his horse as hard as he could, he'd not managed a timely return. Finally, he knocked softly on the door. Boyette opened it. She too hesitated, as if making a decision, and then rather than admitting him into the bedroom, stepped outside, joining him in the hallway, closing the door behind herself. "The Femina sleeps," Boyette said. "It was a tiring journey for her." Yes, I understand. But she is, well?" "Yes, Viceroy, though she is not quite fully recovered from her previous ordeals, and is weak. Weaker than she would have us see, I'm inclined to believe. She almost slumped arising the staircase." "Females are naturally weaker, are they not?" "That is true, Viceroy." "I don't wish to wake her," Jozef said, disgruntled, sounding like he very much wished to wake her, look at her, talk to her, and more. "That is considerate of you." "But you must have her ready for dinner tonight." "Dinner? Perhaps a quiet supper in her room, sir, until she acclimates." "No, I've invited people to dine with us. Some of my associates and some royals. They'll bring their feminas. It will make Volina more comfortable, being around her own. She'll see how this can work, that she has nothing to fear. 2 of the feminas are not even tethered." "Sir, may I disagree with you?" "You may, and you need not ask permission henceforth." "That is most generous, sir. I am not sure of the soundness of presenting her to others yet. Volina's misbehavior could prove unpredictable. She has a wildness to her I do not yet savvy." "I shall be lenient if some compromising fault leads her astray," Jozef stated with impunity, thoroughly sure of himself. He was a viceroy. "And her clothes, sir, are problematic." "Clothes? You've seen her closet. I spent a fortune on that wardrobe. There is not one pearl, jewel, or gold thread that is false. That cloth is the finest that—" "The clothes are superb, sir. The best any femina could hope for. That is the problem. They are the clothes of a femina. And from what was in her record, sir, that was the first battle the calming house had with her, one that they never did win. Felina refused to don the clothes of a femina. She withstood going naked, without food, and finally the disciplinarian. They could not get her to put on that first pinafore.
The what?
A dress given to the girls after they arrived, sir. It is lovely. All embroidered flowers, quite exquisite. But these females were from faraway locales, not inured to such finery. Most knew only bark cloth, or at best, boiled wool. So the pinafore was foreign to them, but it was explained that these are the things feminas wear. And many understood, sir, that by putting on the pinafore, they were giving up their past lives and yielding to the new one before them. Many rebelled, refused. Only Velina maintained her refusal. Eventually she was given old pinafores to wear, which she immediately ripped the embroidery from. An accommodation of sorts. Technically she was wearing the pinafore. In reality, no.
Well, she must dress tonight. I can't present her in rags. People will think I'm mistreating her. And she is a femina whether she likes it or not. Dress her yourself if you have to. It's only for a few hours. We'll take her to the city tomorrow, and the dressmakers can make her whatever she wants. He used his vicereine, discussion over, voice.
Boyette mentally sighed. He did not understand the battle, no, the war, facing him. Managing both of them, she knew, was going to test the utmost of her skills. She pulled the base tether stone from her pocket. You do have a secure place for this, sir. I have set Felina's collar to give her access to the dwelling and the outside garden. Is that satisfactory to you?
Jozef took the base stone warily. Explain it to me again. Exactly. How it works. I do not want her injured.
The collar has magnetized iron crystals, sir, all split, strung, so they are kept apart. Their imbued magnetism tries to make them reunite. But that base stone, she pointed to the unexceptional small rock in Jozef's hand, is much more powerful. It is suffused with magnetism that, along with the way the split crystals are strung, is strong enough to keep them shut apart when the collar is within distance of it. As long as Velina wears the collar and stays within that set distance, her collar may tighten the further she is from it, but not to a painful degree. And I can adjust the collar, sir, to give her ever more distance that she may travel safely away from the base, up to a point.
Ingenious, but you can also tighten the collar.
Yes, sir, I can adjust her allowed area at your behest, restricted or liberal.
I've heard the collar can be set beyond discomfort to... He did not finish.
The collar can be lethal, sir. If you want me to set it to that if Velina goes too far from the base stone, I can do so. Some men prefer this, as it is a warning to others that it will do them no good to abscond with the femina. I very much do not recommend this, sir. A tragic accident could occur. Right now the collar is set only to cause unconsciousness if Velina goes too far. Inordinate care must be taken with the base stone, sir, always. There are 2 keys to her collar, one for you which you must keep unerringly secure, and one for me. Boyette pulled a thin chain up from underneath her sheath. On it dangled a silver key. Jozef took the identical key she offered him dubiously, trying to ignore the troublesome feeling it gave him. And she can't just cut the collar off? No, sir. Essentially, it is many strands strung with a strong metal. It is designed so that the first strand cut would cause a cascade effect. All the iron crystals would no longer be held apart. They would overcome the base stone and reunite.
Choking her.
Strangling her, sir, and she knows this. The calming house will have trained her well in this limitation.
Jozef and his conscience were battling, and both were losing.
Not ingenious, Boyette. Filthy. The sooner Volina no longer needs it, the better. Jozef had seen the collars before, on the royals' females, and on the young men of the bordellos, the fimes, but he'd never seen an actual base stone. Carriers of the base stone always kept them concealed, like a dirty secret, just as the onerous collars were always designed to look like comely ornament, not the mark of enslavement. Have her downstairs to greet my guests for dinner in 2 hours, Boyette, and tell her, he paused, tell her I am not her enemy. Yes, Vicereine, Boyette said in standard Boyette diffidence, knowing full well that for this femina, Vicereine Jozef of Barrow Province would unquestionably be most loathsome enemy number 1.
But how did you acquire a female Vicereine? The Sharif pressed. There are no more, and any would have gone to the royals.
The Sharif glanced nervously at the 3 royals also seated at the dinner table, hoping he had not offended. I must confess, Royal Gravine added in his usual pedantic tone, when I received your invitation to welcome your new femina, I too was of disbelief. It was a special situation, Jozef answered cryptically, knowing that not one of his guests truly gave any credence to his having a real female upstairs. No, he mused, maybe Magistrum Pritz did. Jozef had, after all, as the Magistrum always himself said, been his brightest student back at the Collegium. But his other guests? They undoubtedly now surmised him the biggest dunce in the province. Jozef renewed his efforts to hide his fuming impatience at Volina's delayed dinner presentment. The female was taking her gall-darn blasted time about it. He wondered if she was upstairs dawdling, or the Boyette was having to coerce her into a gown that had cost him. He stopped his thinking on that score. He'd known what the expense would be when he'd agreed to buy her, but still, that she didn't even want to wear them.
She's just skittish,
Gravine's femina said.
Arrival at a dwelling can be a shuddersome experience for a new femina, newly released from the comming house.
Gravine raised his femina's hand to his lips, kissing it tenderly. As I recall, my dear, you were shaking so much we cleared all the porcelain vases from the rooms to stave off ruination, and despite all my bungling entreaties, you would not look me in the eye for weeks. The femina giggled, and 5 of Jozef's seated guests, and all 5 of his standing servants, sucked in their breath at the sound. This dinner, Jozef knew, was preposterous. No royal had ever before brought a femina to his dwelling, let alone 3 of them. Royals kept their feminas associating with other royals, not clones like him, regardless of how wealthy. Oh, the royals themselves would come to his dwelling occasionally, especially if the wine was laudable, but they did not bring their females, not around the likes of him. Yet when invited to meet his new femina with theirs, all 3 had accepted. He presumed he knew why. They assumed he'd been bamboozled, that upstairs was a fime, a young man surgically altered to appear female, and he'd fallen for it. They were all eagerly set to pounce, hoot their derision at his folly, and show this clone what a real female looked like. What he would never have. Jozef knew that the Sharif of Barrow City had come at his invitation simply because Jozef was the Vicereine of Barrow Province. Jozef had invited the Sharif out of careful forethought. It was best the man knew of all the females in the city and province, who belonged to whom, no disputes to be made on the matter. The magistrum from the Collegium Jozef had invited purely for the personal enjoyment of showing his erstwhile mentor how he now had a femina. The other 3 at the table were mere buffer guests, invited out of propriety. 2 were important men from the city, 1 from the province. All were clones.
Did you hire a Boyette for her?
Gravine's femina asked Jozef politely. The Sharif harumphed. Yes, Joseph answered, turning to the Sharif, all hearing the man's abrasive inflection. I take it you know of the Boyette's legal difficulties. I do keep abreast of convicted criminals in the city and province, Viceroy. An interesting choice for Boyette, though I'm sure you had your reasons. He appended quickly. The Boyette is a criminal? Ravine asked incredulously. The Boyette I hired was convicted in a capital court of interference with a disciplinarian, Joseph said flatly. She has appealed to a barrow court for sufferance and is awaiting their decision. Oh dear, one of the other feminists said. That's not very likely, is it? What will happen to her? A lengthy prison term is usually required in these matters, Ravine said. We must set the example. Can't have the Boyettes going about doing whatever they please, sticking their sizable noses into everything. But imprisonment for a Boyette? They don't do well there, do they? No, Femin, Joseph said. They do not. They die. There was a noise from outside the dining hall, and the heads of his 11 guests eagerly swung about to the entrance, all expecting to see an elaborately made-up man make a spectacle of a debut. And there, Boyette behind her, was Yuri. The silence was colossal. Complete, stunned silence. Yuri was dressed in a pale violet full-skirted gown of habitized silk, layered lightly over crinoline petticoats that gave a sibilant rustle with each step she took. Her skin was a luminous alabaster, her long hair a shiny dark copper. Her face was angelic, her brown eyes doe-like. She was strikingly beautiful. Luscious, more than one of them thought. She could be of the Orphic folk. There wasn't one person in the room who didn't apperceive this was female. Joseph stood, thinking the Duke had not lied. She has the most fetchingly perfect opaline skin. Felina, he said, captivated by the intoxicating feminine aura she seemed to pour over him. Your place is here. With a self-congratulatory smile and pride-filled eyes, he gestured to an empty chair beside him. Yuri froze. She had not foreseen this. She remembered him from the cellar, but the light had been poor there. Here she saw him clearly. He looked attractive, his smile open-hearted, his gesture to the chair convivial and warm. He is Bezarine, you fool, not friend, archdemon. Yuri scanned the room, trying to take it all in. It was just so opulent, all the golds and ivories and deep plush red. The walls were covered in tapestries, the standing servants in starched midnight blue liveries that to Yuri made them all look like wealthy aristocrats. The table was an aurulent blonded wood, inlaid with pearl in an Antarsia design of flowers and birds. And flowers were throughout the room, giant blooms Yuri had no names for, nothing she had ever seen in the forests or village marketplaces of home. On the table was fine silver and china. Yuri recognized that from Lyotheka's collection. She felt a slight prod in the small of her back. The Boyette had given her time to gape at it all, but with a nudge insisted she move forward or be moved forward. This Boyette was dissimilar from the ones Yuri had known at the calming house. She had negotiated with her over her appearance, not ordered or forced it. Yuri had refused to wear any of the garishly glittering dresses festooned with sequins and jewels. Instead of a fight, though, with an unassumed and overbearing kindness emanating from her, the Boyette had simply taken a gown and removed the gaudy overlay, leaving it just a modest dress with a scattering of beadwork to the bodice. It did not look like the regalia Yuri had seen the women at the calming house taught to wear, so Yuri had not been able to conjure up any workable objection to it. She had also stomached the petticoats, a clothing that seemed absurdly far-fetched to her, when the Boyette had pointed out that without them The dress would wrap around and between her legs in pesky affliction. Yuri had flatly refused to allow the boyette to style her hair as a femina, but that too had ended in negotiation. The boyette had settled for a vigorous brushing. All eyes watching her closely, Yuri stepped into the room and sat in the indicated chair as Jozef reseated himself. She was appalled at the contrived appearance of the three feminas at the table who were staring at her unabashed. The feminas were the reason Yuri had not made a fuss about coming. She wanted to see them. Real, live feminas. They were decorated, garlanded, adorned from their elaborately coiffed hairstyles on downward, entwined with every conceivable jewel, ribbon, lace, bow, and sparkling fabric Yuri had ever imagined or heard of. But it was their faces that made Yuri blanch. Painted. Their eyes, lips, cheeks, all painted, making them look too shrill, too aberrant. "You poor things! Look what they've done to you! Oh, you poor, poor things!" "This is unbelievable," Gravine said, staring at Yuri open-mouthed. "How did you do it? I know countless royals who haven't gotten females. And you? And one that looks like this?" Scrumptious, he didn't say. "As I said, it was a special situation." Jozef signaled the servants, who instantly began circling the table, offering platters of food from which the guests served themselves, while staring at Yuri in unconcealed marvel. Yuri remained unmoving, ignoring the platters proffered her until finally Jozef spoke. "Does the menu not please you, Velina?" he asked, reaching out in wry amusement and tipping her chin up so she was forced to look at him. Yuri said nothing, and Jozef glanced questioningly at Boyette, who had melted inconspicuously into a corner. "This food is very rich compared to the Calming House," Gravine's femina, who was a very plump woman, interjected solicitously. "Here, Poppet, try this." She extended a dish of tangy fruits to Yuri, who made no acknowledgment other than to back away as she got a whiff of the woman's cloyingly pungent cologne. "Lambkin?" another of the feminas coaxed. "No one here will hurt you, you know." Involuntarily, Yuri's hand flew up to the collar around her neck, fingering it, and two of the feminas looked away in embarrassment, while the third babbled a nervous reassurance. "Such a fabulous collar, Vicereine! Specially made for your femina by a capital jeweler, I'm sure. The best!" Dead silence. "Have any of you ever heard the story of where the collars supposedly came from?" The Sharif resourcefully attempted to fill the void. "Legend has it that they were originally invented for the Orphics." To this, Yuri looked up. "Indeed," he said, pleased with his own inspired repartee. "Tales passed down regarding the Orphic folk say that iron is poisonous to fairies, that they hate it. And so, hundreds of years ago, the iron crystal collar was invented. Get one around a fairy's throat, and however would one do that?" A femina tittered at the table, and all but Yuri laughed. "That's the story, anyway." The Sharif guffawed in good humor at his social success. "I'm not saying it's true." He construed Yuri brightly, awaiting her appreciative response. What he got was a frosty, ill-tempered glare. So Jozef knew the war had begun. "You will eat," he said to her curtly. In reply, Yuri wordlessly reached out to the plate of steaming food before Jozef, bent one finger under the rim, and flip, upturned it directly onto Jozef's lap. Jozef leapt up in an apoplectic rage, foodstuffs splattering to the floor as he hollered in a volume that would have disturbed even the recently declared dead. "Well, Jozef," the magistrum chuckled in jovial zeal from the far side of the table, "I guess now we know what that special situation was." Alone with her thoughts, Lyatheka sat by the hearth, replaying the conversations, her shrewd mind knowing to go over everything meticulously. She'd find a way, make a way. Yuri is finally to be released soon from the calming house. She did it. She was not broken and she stayed alive, Ironheart had said to her right before this very hearth. But, my precious Yuri, Lyatheka had sung out at his wonderful words, I knew she could do it. Oh, Ironheart, this is the beginning. It shall all. She is not to be sent to the bordello, he'd said gravely. What? What do you mean? It was all arranged. We'd agreed on the price for her with the Duke. Everything was set. But then... What? The Viceroy of Barrow Province intervened. He has bought her. She is to be delivered as soon as her current injuries are healed. But she was not calmed. Apparently that was the reason he was allowed to buy her. I'm sorry, Lyatheka. The plan is destroyed. We will have to begin again with something else. But if it is any consolation to you, the Viceroy who purchased Yuri is known as a praiseworthy man, with a steady decency, so we must find contentment in that. Lyatheka had been thunderstruck. Contentment? Years she'd put into this. Everything depended on it. And Yuri had been bought by a Viceroy? No, no, no. And how could she begin again? That Yuri existed at all was a miracle. And Lyatheka coming across her and recognizing her for what she was, what she would be capable of, that had been divine deliverance. Lyatheka glanced at the overstuffed couch by the window where Yuri and her father had sat that first time, both of them afraid and hushed, but Yuri nevertheless wide-eyed aquiver at the sight of all her books. It had been 8 years ago, though she'd seen the man with Yuri many times before that. Lyatheka was the viceroy of a minor southern province where Yuri and her father had lived, or rather, hidden. Possibly, she mused, Yuri's father had chosen her province because she was female, and he'd hoped Yuri might be better insulated there, like her. But her protection came from being the prior now deceased viceroy's femina, who had borne him several royals, and being far too old to bear any more, and the myriad of guards she maintained for her own protection just in case any man did get ideas. No, more likely the father had chosen her province to hide Yuri because it was the furthest province from the capital, or because he was a gatherer, and there was much to gather in her province for those who knew where to look, and Yuri would unfailingly have known where to look. The father had brought prized, uncut stones from the mountains, rare mosses and truffles from the forest, rainbow-colored fish from the sea, all to the province marketplace where he'd sold them, then vanished quickly. And to anyone who'd inquired, he'd loudly identified Yuri as his clone, then vanished all the quicker. But she had seen. There had been a striking resemblance between the two, yes, but still the boy's face was not the same shape as the father's, and the child's eyes were a much deeper brown and more rounded. The man had kept the child's hair securely hidden under a hat, but Lyatheka had seen an escaped tendril, that curly red-gold glint she was so familiar with. And so, scarcely able to believe it, Lyatheka had watched, and every year, though she could see how the man tried to disguise it in the way he dressed Yuri, it had become clearer to her that the child was not the man's clone, but his relative, and that incredibly, there was not just one exceedingly good reason for him to lie about it, but two. First, Yuri was not his clone, but his daughter. Second, Yuri's mother could only have been one thing, Orphic, a fairy. So Lyatheka had finally taken action. She could not prevent the hunters from the north who came scouring through her province for females, occasionally finding one hidden away with a husband or brother or father in the mountains or forest. The hunters were sent by the royals, so all she could do was see to it word went out whenever such hunters were about. That this father had kept Yuri undetected had been miraculous, and probably helped by the folk. But the child had reached 10 years old, and Lyotheka had known the father would not have been able to shield Yuri much longer. So, when he'd next appeared at the marketplace, she'd had the two of them intercepted by her guards and brought to her dwelling. "Viceroy Lyotheka," the man had sputtered in pure fear, "if I or my son have done anything to displease you, you have my apologies and assurance I will make amends." She'd done a quick reconnaissance of the parlor doors then, made sure they were well shut. "You have done nothing, sir," she'd said, "and it is I who should apologize to you for the manner in which I had you brought here, but I knew you would come with no other. I wish to speak to you about Yuri." The man's hand gripped Yuri's shoulder, and his face had turned ashen. "My clone is of no importance to a grand femina like yourself. He is not a he." The man had frozen in terror. "I mean you no harm, sir, but I can see it. Soon others will as well. Hunters will come athwart you in the forest. They will see the differences between the two of you, and they will check. And that will be the last you will ever see of Yuri. And you know her mother will be of no assistance." I don't know what you're talking about." "I want to help." "Help?" "Give her to me." "Papa!" Yuri had shrieked. "I would never sell." "I didn't say sell. I said give. For her own good. I can protect her far better than you. I can see to it she's taught what she needs to know, and I can—" "Papa taught me how to read and write and do all my numbers," Yuri had piped up. "You stale cheese meanie poop." Lyotheka smiled, staring at the now empty chair, reliving how the brimstone had flashed in that gangling little girl's eyes. "No," Lyotheka intoned, gathering her strength in quiet deliberation. "This is not over. Not this time. What I want to know is why." Jozef seethed at Yuri in aggravation. "Have you been mistreated here? Has anyone done anything but see to your comfort?" Jozef had abandoned his guests, leaving them in the relentlessly attentive care of his dwelling master, Comus, who was feverishly applying them with wine, buzzing in animation about the unparalleled newest arrival to the province, postulating the envy and incense of the province's female-less royals would be to the news. A vicereine had gotten a female. A gorgeous female. Yuri, Jozef, and Boyette were spared this ebullient erudition as they were upstairs in Yuri's bedroom, Jozef having hauled Yuri away none too ceremoniously. "You are Vezarine," Yuri fired back at Jozef as if it was an obvious explanation for her disregard. "So?" Jozef cocked his head, bedeviled. "Enslaver!" "Nobody in my province is enslaved." Yuri looked straight into his eyes and thrust her finger under the tether collar around her neck. "That is for your protection," Jozef scolded, "so you don't go wandering off." "I want to go wandering off." "Are you mad? What would happen to you if you did?" "I would be free." "You would be?" He didn't want to think it, picture it. "No, Valina, you would not be free. You would be the opposite of free. Talk some sense into her, Boyette." "It is true, Valina. With the collar no one will steal you. There would be no point. The collar is your bulwark against that." "Oh, rejoice! And what protects me from him?" "Me?" Jozef yelled, maddened by her lack of remorse. "Why would I harm you?" "I know what you want to do to me." "That is not harm, Valina." "It is to me." "You have done this?" "No, but I know. I will not be your femina. You might as well sell me to the bordello. Get your money back." You sound as if you want to go to the bordello. You can't possibly know what would have happened to you there. No, you will stay here. This is your home. As to the other, we will wait. But not forever, by God, he reproached her ominously. You will bear me my child, a royal. Now come back to the dinner and behave properly. No. Anger swept over his face, turning his eyes to ice-blue sapphires as he stepped toward her. Quickly the boyette intervened. Sir, the Femina has had a long and exacting journey. Perhaps you could see your way to forgiving this offense of exhaustion and let her rest. You said tomorrow you would take her into the city. You would like that, would you not, Velina? Do I wear the collar? Of course. Jozef fumed, trying to bite back his anger, a frustrated miff he'd never quite experienced before. Then I have no say in the matter. I go where the base stone goes. That is what enslavers, what you Vezarine do. Jozef sat down on a large chair, willing his voice to a less forceful cadence. No, Velina, that is not what we do. Not to females, anyway. I know full well what you must have had to endure hiding away in your forest. So unnecessary. I have heard the stories of the females rescued by us from that life. They are found starved, haggard, ill-clothed, and wild. But most of all, uneducated. Look around. How can you possibly compare the life you will have here to the dismally ignorant life you led in some forest hovel? Yuri was surprised. Evidently Jozef had not been told of her condition upon capture. Yuri had been in fine shape. In fact, she'd supped at Lyatheka's lavish dwelling house just 2 nights before. How much do you truly know about Vezarine society, Velina? Jozef asked. I know that every class enslaves the one under it. That's just not true. Yes, we are divided into classes, but that is necessary. Otherwise, there are those who would run amok. Control must be maintained. And yes, now is a particularly volatile time. Rumors of revolt are rampant. Our leader has not solved the problem, as he vouchsafed he would, and people, especially the lower classes, are getting irate. But our classes still are fair. They make sense. You only think that because you're at the top. I am not at the top. The royals are. My class is beneath them. We are designated the landed. Beneath us is the class dubbed the merchants, and below them is everyone else. I know about the merchants. They run the bordellos. Yes, they do. And what you think of the bordellos, would it surprise you to know I feel the same way? I paid a great deal of money to keep you out of one. That's not why you paid the money. No, not completely. But had you gone to the bordello, you would have become miserably acquainted with the bottom of our Vezarine society, the laborers, workers, and the fimes. I've heard of the fimes, too. How can you do that? Make males into false females? It's monstrous. I agree. But mostly it is the laborers who do it, clone themselves, and sell the clone to a bordello. It is a brutal life. But surprisingly, many of the fimes come to enjoy it. Several even are bought from the bordello and enter into uncollared relationships with the man, raise his clones as their mother. And that's how you Vezarine reconcile your conscience? How magnanimous! Velina, the fimes are at the bottom of Vezarine society, but even that level is better off than the life you had, he said ruefully. But they're not the bottom level, the boyettes are. I was speaking of human society. The boyettes are not human, so they aren't really a part of us, just like the Orphic folk. Yuri forced an insolent laugh. There's no such thing as the Orphic folk. That's just a myth. The Orphic are very real. They are fairies, living in ancient barrows and cairns in the forest and mountains. That's where I lived, and I never saw any.
You would not. The Orphic have bodies composed of etheric matter, so pliable and subtle they can camouflage and hide themselves, appear or vanish at will, though I am told sometimes at twilight they can be seen, and in the winter their tracks can be spotted, and in a snowstorm—
You don't like them.
No, Valina, I do not. The Orphic folk are elementals, spirits of nature. They despise human progress. If it were up to them, we would all be living witless in the dirt. No cities, no dwelling houses, no factories.
No males forced to be fimes. No Vezarines stealing feminas.
Steal? We did not steal you out of that forest. We rescued you. And you were not a femina then, but a destitute female in need of our safeguard and shelter. And in case you're wondering, no, feminas in Vezarine society are seldom stolen. Our laws regarding feminas, protecting you, are quite strict. A man who gets a femina is allowed only one in his lifetime, so he must be very careful with her. And if he is injudicious, she has recourse. If you think you are being treated poorly, there is a capital court you can appeal to.
You mean I could get rid of you?
Yuri asked, utterly astonished. They hadn't said anything like that at the calming house. Nor had Lyatheka, she noted. Jozef winced. A femina treated unkindly may have grounds to abrogate her papers of purchase and be awarded to another.
What is unkindly?
Beaten, badly. It is as I said to you, some Vezarine are violent. And to do this, to beat a femina, is the lowest, most reviled behavior any man could do. But such petitions for abrogation from a femina are rare, and the court's granting of them rarer still. Since I will never beat you, it is of no interest to you.
I was beaten all the time.
At the calming house. But you were not a femina then. You had no papers of purchase. You were merely a ward of the Duke, your chaperone. Even so, I do not condone what was done, the horrific methodology the Dukes employed to make their money selling calmed females to the royals. But with the closing of the calming houses, hopefully no female shall ever again have to endure a disciplinarian.
And the fimes? They'll still have to endure them.
That is a different problem. Yes, the bordellos will continue to be employers of disciplinarians. Few fimes become so voluntarily. But you shall never step foot in such a place.
That's where I was supposed to go.
Yuri inwardly wailed, thinking back to how horrified she'd been when Lyatheka had told her.
As there is soon to be only one calming house left, we know where you'll be, Lyatheka had said to her in cold determination. And you must survive this calming house with your soul intact. You must not yield. You've been given the tools you'll need, but it will still be gruesome. You must withstand. The Duke there will not sell you to a royal if you have not submitted. He will relegate you to his side business, the selling of boys to bordellos for forced emasculation. That's where he'll sell you, to whichever bordello pays him the most. And that will be us. It is there that you will be told your mission, Yuri. Not until then. The torturers at the calming houses are formidable. But the bordello, you ought not fear it. It shall be your refuge, not your prison. No, don't fear this bordello. It is the palace nearby that you— Lyatheka had haltered herself, and Yuri had known that whatever she was facing, it would be in that palace, and from the look on Lyatheka's face, it would be extraordinarily dangerous and cruel. I know this is overwhelming for you, Jozef said. Perhaps it was a mistake introducing you to royals tonight. Perhaps they are too discomposing for you yet. They are very powerful.
I dare say. They control the mine.
Where you mine the rocks that fuel your factories, Yuri said in disgust.
Your factories too, Valina. All of us benefit from them. But yes,
The mine provides the power for the factories where virtually all manufactured commodities, especially metals, are made. And it is my class, the landed, who generally own the factories.
Do you?
I own several, though my chief business is agricultural. That is why I mostly live in my province.
And you burn those rocks for fuel here too?
No, only the factories may use the fuel rocks. It is too scarce a commodity to distribute among the populace for common means. There is only one mine, and it is located far from here, by the northern sea. So that is where the factories are. But I have been there, seen the factories around it. They are impressive, a testament to the accomplishment, fortitude, and intellect of men.
It's those rocks that caused females to disappear.
No, Valina, that is a despicable rumor started by the very beings you assert don't exist, the fairies. It was the Orphic folk who cost us our females. The fairies want our destruction. They use their evil magic to try and wipe us from the land, something you do not understand. But we saved ourselves.
By using the Boyettes, a race of people you didn't even include in your rankings.
Boyettes are not people. They are humanoids. And they are not enslaved either. They could leave us if they wanted, but they choose to live near us. We give them jobs, structure, support. Bereft of us, they would starve.
Without them, you would be extinguished.
No. Every day our scientists work on eradicating the magic the Orphic imposed on us. One day we will triumph. But until that day, the Boyettes will offer their cloning services to us, for which they are well paid, and we will continue.
You will never succeed until you stop burning those purulent rocks.
Valina, I've told you, that is scandalous Orphic nonsense, thoroughly debunked. How could a rock burned away up north cause females not to be born in the south? We know what caused the failure of female births on the continent, and it was not the fuel rocks. The royals have determined that absolutely. It was magic, a curse from the Orphic folk.
You, she said in her snippiest voice, is the one who is uneducated. It's the rocks. When you burn them, they put invisible poison into the air.
And how would this invisible poison prevent the conception of only females? If a man was poisoned in that way, he would not be able to participate in conception at all, Jozef expounded dismissively, hoping rudimentary logic wouldn't confuse her.
No, that's not true. A female has two parts to her reproduction. They are called Fs. She has an F and another F. 2 Fs. A man, on the other hand, has only one F. His other half is an M, not an F. She has an FF, he has an MF, and each of them gives half of themselves to their child. So the mother can only give an F because that's all she has. But the father can give an F, and their offspring will be a daughter, or the father can give an M. If the father gives an M, then the offspring will be a son. But because the rocks now damage all the men's Fs, men can't give an F anymore. So now all they can father with a woman is sons.
And where did you hear such ludicrous drivel, Valina?
Knowledgeable people.
She skipped over the name, Liatheca.
Worked it out.
Even if any of that inanity were true, how could this invisible poison affect a man's, what did you call it?
His F. The poison damages the man's F, makes it incapable of completing the reproduction process. So all the man can give is his M. All Vezarine men can ever create are sons. Unless you stop burning the rocks, then maybe your Fs will heal, and you could again make daughters.
Valina, you are spouting Orphic puffery. Think. If the man's F, as you call it, was rendered incapable, and the woman had 2 Fs, don't you think she'd be rendered even doubly incapable? And females are not incapable. Feminists give birth to children routinely. Female Fs aren't affected by the poison, only men's. How convenient. Your gibberish is the result of indoctrination, Valina. You lived in the forest virtually your whole life. A forest that is no doubt highly infected with Orphic fairy superstitions. It is unsurprising you've been so persuaded by this balderdash, but I shall see to it you receive a proper education, an education edified with the liberal enlightenment of the modern day, not the backwoods proselytizing of a race whose most august accomplishment is the shunning of all intellectual development. You are a pompous dumb apple, Yuri snorted in comically proclaimed benediction as she whirled and, in pugnacious, Orphic pride, steamed off to the bathroom. Left incendiary by her petty cynicism, not to mention the lobbed colloquialism, Joseph's fists balled. Have her afresh in the morning, he ordered the boyette. You will come too. He marched out of the room, and Boyette sighed, wondering what obstinacy Valina would cook up by morning. For a moment, she thought that the preposterous thing the Vezirine had said about Valina sounding like she wanted to go to the bordello actually had a ring of truth to it. Ridiculous. As to the theory of the rocks, that she had her own opinion on. But what she wanted to know was how be it the Femina had received such a detailed education, and by whom, and for what purpose, she muttered quietly to herself. Her species did not like unsolved mysteries. It was later that night, well after midnight, that the door to Yuri's room slowly cracked open. Jozef slipped inside soundlessly, padding to the bed where Yuri slept. He made out the boyette cuddled on the floor by the bed, wondered how long it would be before she trusted Valina enough to go sleep in her own attached room. Jozef stood above Yuri gazing at her. He had never seen a woman with her hair down, sleeping at peace. She's like gossamer. He drank in the vision of her, mesmerized by the gentle swell of her bosom under a chemise of frothy tiered lace that, bathed in a moonbeam, somehow scintillated with each breath. It's hypnotic. His eyes feasted, awed by the pure transcendent power of femaleness before him. He thought of how he'd kissed her at the calming house, how wondrous that had felt. But seeing her now, like this, her scent, her lips, he'd never imagined it could ignite such a compelling urgency in him, be so tantalizing. Jozef knew in his soul he had to possess her, own her. But a true possession, a willing one, not mandated by a magnetic tethering, but by love. Would that come? Was it possible? He had seen it many times between the royals and their feminas. Could he achieve it with this one? Overcome her defiance and hostility and show her she was cherished? Maybe, with time. But how to resist her until then? He ran his thumb surreptitiously across her temples, sweeping away her hair, then down her cheek, circling her mouth, brushing her bottom lip. He wanted to stroke her hair. In truth, he wanted to put his hands all over her. But she stirred in her sleep at his indiscretion, and he withdrew. I've never felt this before. The elation, the ache. So whoever you really are, my stubborn little Femina, you're mine now. Make no mistake on that. Ever. Spit all the fire you want. I'll be indulgent as I can. But I'll never give you up. You are bound to me. To me. He knew there would be problems ahead. No matter, he'd deal. He'd keep her inviolable from anyone. Yes, there would be times he knew he'd have to be harsh with her disobedience, apply corrective action, but he'd temper that insofar as he could. She'd triumphed against both a calming house's duke and a disciplinarian, not exactly pushovers. Joseph had to admit he was proud of her temerity and looking forward to showing her off, looking forward to a lifetime with her. Why, he would even let her name all their sons, anything she wanted, within reason. "I'm going to make this work," he whispered to her sleeping form, thinking, "Thanks be to God that Boyette came to me, and I made the most provident decision of my life. I am so keeping you, Valina, forever." The joy of just being alive flooded through him at the sight of her, a female, in his dwelling, under his roof. His! In an act of momentous self-control, he left the room quietly, closing the door behind him. Boyette, on the floor, was pleasantly surprised. She'd never heard of any man delaying in the taking of his new femina. This man was different, commendable. He'd obviously thought she was asleep. Foolish to think a Boyette's vigilance would ever permit someone to approach her femina undetected. Probably the only reason he'd allowed himself to touch Valina at all. But Boyette had heard the pounding of his heart, heard the blood coursing through his body, and even in the moonlight spotted the patina of sweat that had broken out on his brow. She wrinkled her face pensively. "He wants her desperately, and he'll have her, oh yes, and soon, very soon. And the aftermath? Will it destroy her? I don't think so. I think this woman wants as well. She just doesn't recognize the sensation yet. So knowledgeable, so extraordinary. But she doesn't perceive desire? I think, Valina, that whoever provided you with your remarkable education may have left out a few lessons, a few rather crucial ones. Ah, so many toils to come. What discordances shall the first morning of Viceroy Jozef and his new femina bring me?" What the next morning brought to Boyette was a very excited Yuri, her first city visit, but no trouble. Yuri ate her breakfast peacefully and without complaint put on the clothes Boyette had spent much of the night redoing for her. Yuri even allowed her hair to be braided down her back, though she refused the ghastly addition of frilled, lemon-colored pinwheel bows. When it was time to leave, Yuri climbed dutifully into the carriage, sitting diagonally from Jozef, who was contemplating her darkly. Probably, she restrained a smile, still simmering over the flying plate skirmish. She was surprised that Boyette did not follow, but instead climbed up next to the driver. "Why is she sitting up there?" Yuri asked Jozef blithely. "To give us privacy, no doubt." Yuri scoffed. "It will take more than that." "My femina," Jozef said, leaning toward her, his eyes dancing with mirth. "It might not take even that." Yuri felt her face blaze red, and the flush spread throughout her body as some very unbidden images tickled her. And he noticed. Jozef sat back in the carriage, fundamentally pleased, knowing she was going to be worth all that he'd paid for her, and then some. They rode in pretended nonchalance until they approached the city, a vista bursting upon them Yuri could barely believe. "Look at that!" she kept erupting, pointing at mundane things and making the years of Jozef's loneliness drop away into oblivion. But when they crossed the enormous wooden drawbridge that pierced the colossal girth of the city proper, Yuri was speechless. The city was awesome, sprawling. In the morning sunshine, the glow of its thickly clustered buildings made from river pearlstone bordered on iridescent. Interspersed were other buildings, a conglomeration of pink browns, dull russets, then buildings with splashes of bright mint and lavender colors, all of them soaring above the streets, 7, 8, 9 stories high. Yuri was near insensible at the sight. Barrow City is the oldest city on the continent, Jozef said. The very first city ever created by the Vezarine. The streets were crowded with a pulsating cacophony of wagons, men, horses, carts, all gamboling about but instantly melting to the side as their carriage passed by. "Why did they all get out of the way?" Yuri asked when she'd recovered her composure. "My carriage bears the emblem of a viceroy," Jozef shrugged by way of explanation. "They give way for that?" "Yes, just as I would give way for the emblem of a royal." They passed a series of fountains wreathing a park of trees, flowers, and statues, all something Yuri had never before seen, and she gasped, "Masonry people!" "You are definitely not from a city," Jozef said, trying to hold back a smile. "Look there, in the park. Do you see that white building by the children's playground lawn? It sells sugared ice creameries in all flavors. Have you ever had such concoctions?" She hesitated. Did she want to talk about herself to this man? She decided there was no harm as long as she was selective. "You're right. I grew up mostly in the forests and mountains. I went to the village marketplace only occasionally. Never a city. And no, I never had that of which you speak." "You were wise never to go to a city. And you are never to come to this one unless I or your boyette is with you. Sometime I will have your boyette take you to this park to sample the creameries. But for now we are to the dressmaker. You take exception to the attire I provided you? You may tell this dressmaker what you want." "What? You're letting me choose what I want?" Her face lit up. "I want you comfortable, my lady," he said with a conciliatory gesture. "Why?" "So that you will be happy. And so that what I relinquish in your appearance now, I will gain in your debenture later." What Jozef lacked in gallantry, he more than made up for in calculation de l'amour. He wanted her happy? This totally stumped Yuri. She'd never considered that any Vezarine man, other than her father, would ever care about making her happy. At the Calming House, all instruction had been about making the Vezarine man happy. "But you want me to be a femina." "Happiness and being a femina are not mutually exclusive, Volina. You will learn this. Tell me what you object to regarding the costumes of a femina." "Are you daft? Have you looked at them? They're so bedecked. All those flounces, spangles, plumes, tassels, everything." "High standards," he conceded, humor leaching into his voice. "Chic." "They're dresses. Shiny, flamboyant, poofed." She flapped her arms in dramatic gesture for emphasis. "The fluted polonaise style of bustle is quite in vogue right now. The favored cloth, and I know this from the insipid hours I had to spend with stultifying dressmakers selecting the clothing you now refuse to wear, is organza silk or charmeuse satin, all overlaid and trimmed with curly-cued ribbon lace or gemstones. Shiny. I take it you don't like this?" "No." "Then I will not require you to wear it." He saw her incredulity at his words. "Why is that such a brain spin for you? I am a reasonable man, Volina, and it is not my intent to upset you for such a trivial thing as the adornment of your wardrobe. I believe someone in your past has filled your head with false notions about we Vezarine men. Perhaps your experience at the Calming House has left you with a negative preconception. The Calming Houses were—" He stopped as if searching for a competent word. "Evil." "The Calming House said that feminas always had to look of great value." "Perhaps that is so for the femina of a royal, but I am not a royal. Volina, the royals rule. And to do that, they must establish among themselves an echelon, their own ranking system. Many factors determine a royal's rank, which is not fixed. It can rise and it can fall. One factor that increases a royal's standing is his possession of a femina, and a femina that exhibits his prominence for all to see increases his status even more. As I have no such status, it is of no matter to me. Yet, he didn't say. Do you see that castle? That is the summer castle of the Grand Prince, who is the supreme royal of the Vezarine, ruler of the entire continent, until some other royal deposes him and becomes the Grand Prince. But surely you learned this. Oh yes, I learned that, indelibly. Yuri looked upward at the skyline, dominated by the crushing monolithic weight of a charcoal black palace. The palace's iron-plated battlements were mottled in menacing gray shadows, all of its structures interlocked in a pronouncement of baronial self-importance. She shirked, unease crawling up her skin. The looming castle was much more daunting in reality than in the drawings of Laotheka's picture books. The carriage turned a corner and the palace disappeared from view, and Yuri was glad. But there's something I would like you to do for me, Valina. She tensed. I would like you to communicate with me and not with flying dishware. Honestly. I will always listen. I promise you that. Ah, look afore, he urged her. That building, behind the green moat. Yuri looked ahead of the carriage and saw, seeping along the road, a narrow strip of brackish green water. Spanning the water was a heavy wooden bridge that led to a huge grass quadrangle facing the street. The quadrangle was filled with the largest stand of corkscrew willows Yuri had ever seen, swaying leviathans hundreds of years old. Enclosing the quadrangle on three sides was a rambling stone building, pocked with age, but still somehow stellar and majestic. Ancient-looking turrets sprawled from its rooftops, and moss hung from the open front arcade, ringing its exterior in a succession of arches. From the whimsical expression on Jozef's face as their carriage passed, Yuri knew to Jozef this place was very much beloved. The Collegium of Exploration, Discovery, and Invention, he said reverently. I attended it in my youth. She startled. I've heard of it, she stammered. It's where they invented burning the fuel rocks. Its achievements have penetrated even an Orphic forest? Jozef teased her lightheartedly. Yes, this is the place, the most esteemed institution of learning in the world. In N, it's called the Obtuse Oracles of Falderal. This, Yuri, is where Vezarine factories are designed, where our water and sanitary systems are devised. This is where cloning was invented, and oh so much more. I attended here to learn the demands of shipbuilding, which, had I not been pathed to become vicereine of my father's province, is what I would have made my career. I dreamed of commanding the first ship to ever sail away, but then come back. And the postulation Magistrum Pritz says they are working on now will not even sound plausible to you. Sending voices through a wire. Why would anyone want to send their voice through a wire? She asked skeptically. Think of it, Valina. Out at my dwelling house. If I wanted to talk to Magistrum Pritz at the Collegium, I wouldn't have to send a rider, arrange a meeting. All I would have to do would be to talk, and this wire would send my voice directly to the Magistrum, or anywhere. He waited for her awe. Instead, she furrowed her brow. But the Collegium, they also make mistakes, don't they? He was about to question her inquiry when the carriage jolted to a stop before a building decorated like a giant jewel box. Jozef saw the look of astonishment on her face at the garish building. It's called Pietra Dura, the outside matching the wares of the inside. Yuri alighted from the carriage, ignoring Joseph's proffered hand, and stepped under the lattice-covered entranceway where she looked up. The underside of the curved roof was imbued in diminutive gilded tiles and, her attention diverted, she tripped, seizing the handrail for support. The handrail was wrought iron. Instinctively, Yuri snatched her hand away, but not before the boyette's eyes fastened upon it. "Stupid, stupid, stupid!" she chastised herself, forcing her hand back upon the iron, grasping it firmly and thinking, "At least it's not cold." Before her, two flamboyantly lacquered pansy-purple doors jerked inward, and appearing framed in the doorway was an implausibly looking and totally a-fluttered man, gaping at her. "It's true," he gushed in sham humility, but very real jubilance. "Welcome to the Emporium, our winsome new femina. Oh, Vicereine, 1,000 apologies for my doubts. How extraordinary! She is femina beyond question. My dear, you are radiant. Come in, come in. Is there more she's in want of? A femina like this. Let me show you. We've just received today. Eyelet of the most virginal white. It can only be seen when the light strikes it just so. But when it does, I can make the femina. She doesn't like any of the clothes you made for her. Take her downstairs to your ready-made clothes, the simple ones. She will select from those." The normally imperturbable man halted his exhortation crestfallen, unsure if this was good news, he'd get to sell the Vicereine an entire new wardrobe for her, or horrid news. What would happen when word got out this magnificent new female had eschewed his garbings? He began blinking erratically. "Vicereine Jozef, those clothes are for men, boys, fimes, not a grand feminine such as this. So please, my dear, if you will just tell me your preferences, he dithered. "Don't call me that." Looking awkwardly to Jozef for reprieve, the befuddled man's attempt at recovering a smile faded. "You may call her Lady Volina," Jozef said tersely. "Lady? Surely Volina is entitled to the honor of her—" "Lady Volina," Jozef hissed like an angry snake, painfully aware that the title was more associated with a successful fime than an exceptional femina like Volina. And she was exceptional. Jozef knew that. Jozef also knew he was beyond thrilled with her, and henceforth would do anything to keep her, including putting up with an irritating title until she was ready to accept her proper one. It was what he knew he would be willing to do to win her that scared Jozef to his marrow. I hope you've enjoyed these chapters of Bound Fairy. If you'd like to purchase the complete audiobook, it's for sale on Amazon, Apple Books, Google Play Books, Nook Books, Kobo, and many more storefronts. Also, you can borrow it for free from your local library. Just tell the library to first download it from Bibliotheca. They'll know what that means. Thanks again for listening.